John's appearance is brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit GinoPinto.com, 561-8199. Go to GinoPinto.com. Geno's of Hamilton, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. All right, we've got NFL news and notes. We got the Eagles and the Cowboys, and one name at the top of that injury list that was a little concerning there, but it seems that John tweeted out a little while ago that Alshon Jeffery said he's fine, expects to play, John, but he is on that injury list, and I guess this is something that maybe has been lingering throughout the last couple of weeks here for him.
Yeah, they did add him, so obviously that makes you raise your eyebrows a little bit. That's kind of what happened with Zach Ertz before the Denver game, and all of a sudden he's a late scratch. But saw Alshon walk into the shower, didn't have a limp or anything. Then he came out and actually talked and said he expects to play. So we can only take him at their word. And he certainly looked fine, so it's probably more of a precautionary thing than anything else.
Yeah, obviously, to have these guys that sneak on this injury report late in the week sometimes, you kind of say, oh, when did that happen? Did it happen in the practice or did it happen in a game? So this is something that he said maybe happened somewhere along the line, not this week in practice.
Well, Alshon doesn't really – he's not the most talkative guy in the world. So you would think because he wasn't on the injury report Wednesday and he showed up on Thursday and he was out there early when the media is allowed to watch and observe. So you would think that he tweaked it during practice and didn't finish. That tends to be what happens when you have to list somebody as limited. We'll know for sure when Doug speaks tomorrow morning, but I think the bigger story is that he's fine and expects to play.
Let me ask you a little bit more about Alshon, where he is, because he is on a one-year deal, John. And I know we don't want to focus too much ahead on next year, but just how he does fit in with this team in the locker room. And, I don't want to speculate on whether or not they're going to let him walk or bring him back or anything, but has that signing been what they thought it was going to be?
I don't think so, to be honest. I don't think he's produced to where they thought he would. There's still time. But I think from his perspective, and he's never going to say it, you see one of those other guys who wasn't signed to a one-year deal, but he was traded and brought in on the last year of his contract, and that's Tim Jernigan. And the Eagles extended him early. And if you look at Howie Roseman's history, he tends to identify players he wants and extends them before they can get to free agency. So that's something that could sort of start creeping into your mind, especially when it happens for somebody else. So we'll have to see as the season progresses. To date, there's been no evidence that that's affected Alshon. But, no, I think the hope was that he was going to be a true number one receiver in this league, not just on this team. We always talk about what's really a number one wide receiver. Well, there's going to be a top wide receiver on every team, but that doesn't make them a so-called wide receiver one in the NFL. Guys like Julio Jones or A.J. Green or names like that. I don't think Alshon has lived up to that billing, and I think that was the hope. Well, he hasn't played poorly on the other side of the coin, so it depends how you kind of frame it.
Yeah, 34 catches, 500 yards, and 5 touchdowns. 2 of them came in that Denver game. So
Denver blowout.
Yeah, the Denver blowout. So 5 touchdowns, not bad. The 500 yards, he's not on pace for 1,000 yards quite yet. He could have a big game against Dallas and put himself there. But, you move forward here. The one question would be, if they don't bring Alshon back, then you're starting over kind of again, and then you're giving Wentz another guy he's got to try to get familiar with. Can you say that him and Wentz just haven't been on the same page, but they're getting there? And do they have guys on the team that could supplant him if they let him walk?
I don't think they do.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue, right?
I think Yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of hope surrounding Mac Hollins and his skill set and what he could eventually be. But I don't think you look at him and say he's ready to be a top-tier receiver in the NFL right away. We've talked about the improvement of Nelson Aguilar, but I don't think he's best suited for a starring role, so to speak. And that's what you have to be if you're going to be the receiver that gets the most attention. So I don't think there is something in-house where they can immediately replace him with. But while I say that, remember, the assumption, and I kind of talked about this yesterday when Sean was on the show and we were talking about Teddy Bridgewater, the assumption is somebody else is going to give Alshon Jeffery a ton of money. Well, if he continues to play at this rate, he's not. So maybe you can bring him back at a more logical figure, 2 or 3 year deal at less money than a true number one receiver would get. So there's 2 ways you can go about it. But right now, I don't think he's played himself into the kind of contract he was hoping for, either here or somewhere else. So I think that plays into it as well.
Hey, John, you know, the popular notion when you're trying to promote this game, if you're NBC and Sunday Night Football, is Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz, 2 marquee guys, and that moves the needle. But, of course, the talk that you get from the coaches on each side and the players on each side is that it's not Dak versus Carson. You write about that on our website today. I thought your line of the piece that you had today was near the end when you said the Mutual Admiration Society. I guess you've seen a lot of niceties on each side, right?
Yeah, and I think there is a lot of respect. I mean, Carson and Dak came from the same draft class. They got to know each other a little bit in that pre-draft build-up at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine, things like that. The Eagles brought in Dak Prescott to work out at the NovaCare complex. They liked him a lot. So I think from that standpoint, everybody likes each other, and that's not necessarily what you like to hear in the Eagles-Cowboys week. But it's the reality of the situation. Obviously, it's obvious that Carson Wentz plays against the Cowboys defense. He doesn't play against Dak Prescott, and vice versa. So I've always kind of shook my head at these Wentz versus Prescott things because it doesn't come down to that, but that's just the nature of it. They're 2 high-profile guys. They're 2 stars. They're going to be linked together for years and years, and that's just the way it is. But when the game is over Sunday, as I mentioned, no matter who wins, it's not going to be because of Dak and Carson squaring off against each other. I mean, that's just not what football is. The quarterback doesn't play against the quarterback.
Yeah, and one thing. Well, and I agree with you. I mean, I'm just flipping the coin and playing devil's advocate for all intents and purposes. I think when they say those things, it's because typically the quarterback leads the team to victory. So which quarterback's going to play better has a big factor in who wins the game on Sunday night. Now, that's not necessarily always true. I mean, Dak could go 30 for 40 with 380 yards and 4 touchdowns, and they lose. But for the most part, a quarterback is the guy who gets the most credit when a team wins or loses. They take the most heat.
Well, there's no question about that. It's probably the most important position in sports, and certainly they have a huge impact on any game. But if you use last year as an example, I mean, the Cowboys were 13-3. They made the playoffs. The Eagles were under 500. But I don't know a lot of personnel people in the NFL that would have taken Dak Prescott over Carson Wentz even after those seasons because they think Wentz has the higher ceiling, has the better skill set long term. And that's not a criticism of Dak Prescott because he was great. But that just kind of shows you there are other impacts to winning football games, and there are 52 other guys trying to work towards winning the game.
John, obviously the game this week is pretty important for Dallas. I mean, they're playing for basically their playoffs lives because a loss, too, I mean, they'd be a couple of games back even in the wild card race, you know, if things go against them this weekend. So this is a really big game for them. Do you anticipate them putting this game in Dak Prescott's hands, or do you think they say, you know what, we need to simplify things a little bit, let's turn around and run the ball a little bit more? So what kind of Cowboys team do you think Jason Garrett puts on the field Sunday night?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on if they can get Teron Smith on the field. I really do. He didn't practice again today. He's dealing with back and groin issues. It's probably not the smartest thing in the world to try to push him back. But they were so bad without him and giving up the 8 sacks and the 6 to Adrian Claiborne. I could see them, if he's able to practice a little bit on Friday, I could see them trying to get him back on the field. And if that's the case, I think they're more apt to go towards a regular offense. If it's not the case, look, I think they understand after last week in Atlanta that they have to tweak some things and they have to help, whether it's Chaz Green or Byron Bell playing left tackle. They have to do a lot, whether it's max protect, whether it's chip. They have to game plan with that in mind, and that means probably leaning more on the running game, doing a little more play action. So I do think they'll be scaled back if Teron Smith is not able to play.
Yeah, and obviously on the defensive side of the ball, I want to get your take on losing Lee. And he's been a disruptor every time it seems like the Eagles play.
Justin Durant doesn't put fear in your heart, Mike Gill?
Yeah, nobody's quite like Sean Lee.
Yeah, I mean, he's their best defensive player, but to be honest, they're used to playing without him. I mean, I don't think he's ever played 16 games in the season. He's been an injury-prone guy. So they're better when he's out there. There's no question about it. But as I said, they're used to playing at least a couple games without him every year. And you know, Rod Marinelli's one of the assistant coaches. I've talked about it a lot, their defensive coordinator. I think he's one of the best assistants in the NFL. He always puts together a unit that's sort of greater than the sum of its parts. And I expect him to do it again with or without Sean Lee. He's obviously not going to play. It's an issue. And you know, Justin Durant or Jalen Smith will have to come in. And I imagine they'll play better than you expect when you look at the names. That's just what the Cowboys kind of do defensively.
Hey, John, I know the Eagles have had a lot of success on offense early, 5 out of 9 times on the first possession they've scored, 5 out of 9 times on the second possession. Was anybody up there able to shed any light on why they're having such success early?
Well, I think they're really good at scripting plays. You know, generally the first 15 you script before. And I think when you have good play callers, and I think Doug has proven himself to be a pretty good play caller, pretty imaginative play caller, you're generally really good at the beginning of games when you do script that stuff. And the key is to keep it going, and that's more difficult because you can't script out an entire NFL game. And that's when teams tend to run into problems. But it's not a surprise the Eagles are good at the beginning of games. I think that'll continue the rest of the season because they have a good play caller and they have a good quarterback.
And, of course, Doug Pederson's you brought up Doug, he's used the word self-scout before, and I know he was asked about last year's game in Dallas, and that was one where a lot of people questioned some of his decision-making. Did he shed any light on the fact that maybe he's reflecting on that game or he's learned from it?
Yeah, he did the other day, and I think, you know, part of the aggression part, I mean, that's just what it is. He's a very aggressive coach. And people like that when it works, and they hate it when it doesn't work. And that's just never going to change. I think the numbers, people love analytics now. I think the numbers kind of trend towards Doug's direction, and the fact that it's good to be aggressive in this league. It's good to take chances on fourth down because it's going to, over a large sample size, it's going to work out in your favor. And I think that's been the case with him, and I think it's going to continue to be very aggressive. When you talk about the fake punt, things like that, I mean, it's rare the Eagles sort of got on special teams ever since Dave Phipps got here, which is before Doug Pederson did. I mean, but occasionally you get caught. And the Cowboys won a couple games that way last year when they were completely outplayed and sort of won it at the end. And sometimes it's just, as simple as things were going their way last season, and it's just not going that way this season. So I think the Eagles are a completely different team. They're obviously a much better team. They've already won more games than they won last year. And the Cowboys are guaranteed to lose more than they lost last year. So I think that kind of says it all.
Well, one thing, John, in the NFL, which is like it's so year to year, but do you think the Eagles are more sustainable? Why would Dallas? What happened to Dallas that they went from 13-3 to now a 5-4 team? I mean, they played with Zeke Elliott for 9 games, and they were still just average. They were 13-3 last year. Whereas Philadelphia, do you think they have the sustainability, or is this kind of a one-year shot, and then they take the Giants won 11 games last year. This year they have 1 win.
Yeah, I do think they're set up more than most teams to sustain it, and that's because of Carson Wentz. And that's, I always say, and I'm not comparing them to guys like Peyton Manning, especially who I think is the best regular season quarterback of all time. And I say that because of his consistency from year to year, and whether it was Indianapolis or even later in his career in Denver, I always say, those teams went into a season kind of understanding they were going to win 10 games. And they went from there. And, sort of like 10 wins would be a bad season. And then you would get up to 12 or 13 and try to get the 1 seed or the 2 seed. I'm not saying Carson's going to be that guy, but he's got the potential to be that type of quarterback that gives you that consistency from year to year, because you're always going to have hiccups and you're always going to have bad things happen, whether it's suspension or injury or things of that nature. And he's kind of seen it in season with the Eagles. We don't talk. Other teams talk a lot about injuries, and the Cowboys are a perfect example of it. And in their case, it's injuries and suspension. And it's Elliott, and it's Smith, and it's Lee, and we just mentioned those guys, and it's Dan Bailey. I kind of said yesterday on the show, the Eagles have had a lot of key injuries. Jason Peters, Jordan Hicks, Darren Sproles, all out for the year. Those are really good players. And you know what? You go to the Novacare complex every day, nobody talks about it. And it's not because they're not good players, but it's because they've been able to overcome it. And it starts with, let's be honest, it starts with number 11.
Well, and it's been a big topic from the Dallas fans anyway, that, we lost the tackle, we lost Lee, the kicker's out. The Eagles lost their kicker. They lost their linebacker. They lost their left tackle. They lost their corner. They lost their running back, much like Dallas. So there's a lot of similarities, but Philadelphia's persevered.
Yeah, and by the way, by no means am I trying to say Dak Prescott is a bad quarterback, because I think he's a really good quarterback. I just don't think he's Carson Wentz. And I don't think he's the type of guy that can overcome significant injuries and suspensions like the Cowboys have undergone. And by the way, that's most quarterbacks. There are only very, very few that could overcome some of the injuries the Eagles have had to go through. And he's one of them. And they're lucky to have him.
No doubt, John. And, of course, you can read more from John McMullen at 973ESPN.com. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen and read his NFL column, Extra Points, on our website, 973ESPN.com. He says it's not Dak and Carson. It's Cowboys. Eagles versus Cowboys. And we'll have John's pick for the game tomorrow here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.